the number one question that many people have when they come in here, and that is, are these rockets real? Yes, these are real rockets, with one exception. The silver one over on my left that says 109D at the bottom, that's real model. But all of the rest of these are real rockets. Well, the next logical question is, did these rockets ever fly? No, they did not. If they had flown, they would not be here today. These are leftover rockets that could have flown. Now, the other thing to know about most of the rockets here in the garden is that they were originally military missiles, and we converted them for use into the space program. Wow. We're going to walk up here just a few more steps, and I think this is probably a good place to start. So what I'd like to do is to take you all back in time to the year 1957. Now, during the 1950s, we were involved in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. We disagreed with them philosophically, and we were competing with them militarily. So imagine our surprise when we woke up one morning in October of 1957 and discovered that the Soviet Union had launched a satellite into orbit around the Earth. No one had ever done that before. That satellite was called Sputnik. It was about the size of a beach ball, and it went beep, beep, beep as it orbited the Earth. Well, we knew we had to respond to that. And in January 1958, we launched our first satellite into orbit. That satellite was called Explorer 1, and it launched on a rocket just like the one you see over here that has the letters UE on it. This is the Juno 1 rocket. And if you look way at the top, that thing that kind of looks like an oversized pencil, that's where the satellite was located. Now, this particular satellite had a Geiger counter built into it. There was a theory at the time that the Earth is surrounded by bands of radiation. And Dr. James Van Allen, one of the proponents of that theory, helped to design that satellite. Well, that Juno 1 rocket lifted off, we put the satellite into orbit, and we did prove that those radiation bands exist. And today they are known as the Van Allen belts. Well, we wanted to launch bigger satellites, bigger payloads than we could fit on the Juno 1. So we turned to a rocket just like the one you see over here that has NASA written on it. This is the Juno 2 rocket. Now, we had some early problems with the Juno 2, but one of its first successes was the flight of a satellite called Pioneer 4. Pioneer 4 was designed to fly by the moon and take pictures of the moon. Well, we didn't get quite as close to the moon as we hoped. We missed it by about 37,000 miles. But we were still learning how to do this stuff. Another rocket we used to launch early satellites is one just like the one you see right here. This is the Thor Delta rocket. Now, Thor Delta was instrumental in launching our earliest communications satellites. The very first of those was a big silver mylar balloon called Echo. And one of the most famous telecommunications satellites at the time was called Telstar. Now, Telstar was very popular in culture. And in fact, there was a British rock group who wrote a song called Telstar, named after the satellite. Well, it was great. We were learning all of these skills. We were getting a lot of good information by launching satellites into orbit, but we really wanted to put a person into space. So if you'll walk with me just to the other side of this circle, I will show you our earliest manned rockets. Now, we recruited test pilots. We looked at a lot of different test pilots, and we ended up selecting 7 of the best and the brightest to become our first astronauts in what was called Project Mercury. Now, these guys were really competitive. They competed with each other in all sorts of different ways because each one of them thought they were going to be the first person in space. And you know what? They were all wrong. Because in April of 1961, the Soviet Union launched Yuri Gagarin into orbit. He was the first person in space. He did one orbit of the Earth and we had egg on our face again. We were still running behind in what was becoming known as the space race. Well, less than 1 month later, on May 5th, 1961, we launched our first American into space. His name was Alan Shepard, and he launched on top of the Mercury Redstone rocket. Just like the one you see behind us here, with the red United States, the black and white stripes, and that black bell-shaped capsule is the Mercury capsule. It held 1 astronaut. Now, Shepard's flight went up about 116 miles. It arced over the Atlantic Ocean, splashed down in the Atlantic near the Bahamas. Total flight time was about 15 minutes. Well, just 20 days later, President Kennedy issued a challenge. He said, we're going to send a man to the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade. Well, NASA didn't exactly know that the president was going to issue that challenge, so their response went something like, well, let's see now, we've had a total of 15 minutes experience in space, and we've flown all the way to the Bahamas. We think the moon may be just a little bit farther away than that. But they did accept the challenge. So we had one more manned mission on the Mercury Redstone rocket. That was the flight of Gus Grissom. But we really wanted to put an American into orbit around the Earth. And for that, we needed a bigger rocket. We turned to the Atlas rocket, just like the silver one that you see over here. And again, look at the top, you'll see a Mercury capsule over there. Now, Atlas was our first intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. Again, we converted it for use into the space program. And in February of 1962, John Glenn became the most famous man in the Western world when he became the first American to orbit the Earth. He did 3 Earth orbits, had a very successful mission. He got a ticker tape parade. So we had 3 more manned missions on the Mercury Atlas rocket, and at the end of Project Mercury, we had proved that man can exist in space. We discovered that our eyes weren't going to bug out, our blood wasn't going to boil. Well, that was good. But if we were going to get to the moon and back, we had to learn how to work in space. So we moved from Project Mercury to what was called Project Gemini. And if you'll walk with me over in this direction, I will show you the rocket we used to get our Gemini astronauts into orbit. Now remember, the Gemini means the twins. That Gemini capsule held 2 astronauts. The other big difference between Gemini and the earlier Mercury capsule is that the Gemini capsule was maneuverable. You could steer it. You could actually change its orbit in space. Now this big silver rocket in front of us is the Titan II rocket. Again, it was originally built as an intercontinental ballistic missile. But if you look way at the top of this one, you will see a Gemini capsule up there. Now, we had a number of firsts that were part of the Gemini program. We had our first American spacewalker. That was Ed White with the flight of Gemini 4. We had our first rendezvous in space, where there were 2 Gemini capsules in orbit at the same time. Those were Gemini 6 and Gemini 7. Now, those 2 capsules never physically touched, but they got so close to each other that the 2 crews could see each other out of the windows of their respective capsules. Speaking of Gemini 7, it was at that point in time the longest duration American spaceflight. Gemini 7 was in orbit for 14 days. If you look over here on the ground, you can see a mock-up of a Gemini capsule. There's 2 seats inside. Maybe you can see in there. Get a sense of how much space there is in there. I want you to imagine sitting next to someone else in that amount of space for 14 days. Now remember, you can't stand up during that time. You have to work with that person, you have to sleep with that person, you have to eat with that person, you have to do those things associated with eating with that person, if you get what I'm talking about. Does anybody here think they could do that for 14 days? Yeah, you don't see my hand raised either. These guys were tough. Now another thing we had to learn was how to physically dock with another vehicle in space. And for that, we turned back to the Atlas rocket. If you look at this Atlas rocket that's behind us, way up at the top, you will see a stage that says Agena. Well, we would use that Agena stage, you put it into orbit, and then do this target tracker. Once it was in orbit, we would launch the Titan II rocket, Gemini astronauts on board. That Gemini capsule would maneuver, find the Agena stage, close in, and physically dock with it. We had to know how to do that if we were going to get to the moon. So by the end of Project Gemini, and that took place in 1965 and 66, we were excited. We were ready to go. We said, we've learned all these new skills, now let's go to the moon. So we moved into Project Apollo. Well, the Apollo capsule was bigger still. It held 3 astronauts. To get it into space, we needed a bigger rocket. We turned to the Saturn 1B rocket, just like the one you see lying on the side there in the background. Now, the Saturn 1B is the only rocket here in the garden that was not originally a military missile. It was built specifically for human spaceflight. In January of 1967, the 3 Apollo 1 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were doing a dress rehearsal of their launch. They were inside the capsule on top of the rocket out on the launch pad. Inside that capsule, 2 wires sparked, causing a flash fire that filled the capsule. And unfortunately, we lost all 3 astronauts. Now, that was a tragedy. But at the same time, it was a wake-up call for NASA. They pulled back. They totally re-examined that Apollo capsule and made over 1,300 changes to it. And a little less than 2 years later, in October 1968, NASA launched Apollo 7. An 11-day mission around the Earth. That mission was so successful that NASA said for our very next flight, we are going to the moon. But to get to the moon, we needed an even bigger rocket yet. We turned to the Saturn V. Now, we don't have a Saturn V rocket here in the garden, but when you take your bus tour a little bit later today, we're going to drop you off at the Apollo Saturn V Center, where you will see a real Saturn V rocket, and it is huge. To kind of give you an idea of how big it is, if you look at this gray bell-shaped engine standing on the ground, that is the F1 engine, still the most powerful liquid-fueled rocket engine ever built. The thrust out of that one engine is almost as powerful as the thrust out of all of the red engines on the Saturn 1B combined. And there are 5 F1 engines on just the first stage of that Saturn V rocket. Trust me, you'll be impressed when you see it. So in December 1968, NASA launched Apollo 8. We sent 3 astronauts to the moon, put them in orbit around the moon. On Christmas Eve, they sent back a very moving photograph of the lunar landscape with the Earth rising in the background. Very dramatic photo sent to the entire planet. So we followed Apollo 8 with Apollo 9, Apollo 10, and then of course in July 1969, we did land our first man on the moon with the flight of Apollo 11. All right, time for a quick quiz. Who can tell me the name of the first person to set foot on the moon? Just shout it out. There we go, Neil Armstrong. How about the second person to set foot on the moon?
Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz Aldrin, very good. And I'm glad nobody said Buzz Lightyear. Don't confuse those 2. So, we have had 6 manned moon landings. Only 12 people have ever walked on the moon. And of course, they all launched from right here at the Kennedy Space Center. Apollo 17 was our last moon landing, but it was not the end of the Apollo program. From there, we moved to what was called Project Skylab. Now, Skylab was our first attempt at working with a space station. We took a 3rd stage of a Saturn V rocket, refurbished the inside to make it habitable, and put it into orbit around the Earth. We went back to using the Saturn 1B rocket to get our astronauts up there. We had several Skylab missions, the longest of which was 84 days in duration. So we did prove that man can stay in space for an extended period of time. The very last Apollo mission had a special significance. In 1975, we sent 3 American astronauts into orbit around the Earth. And at the same time, the Soviet Union sent 2 Soviet cosmonauts into orbit in their Soyuz capsule. Well, those 2 capsules rendezvoused. They physically docked, the 2 hatches opened, an American astronaut and Soviet cosmonaut reached out and shook hands in space. So to bring all of this full circle, we went from the 1950s, when we were in total competition with the Soviet Union, to the mid-70s, where, at least in the arena of the space program, we were moving to more of an era of cooperation. And that cooperation has continued even to today. Now, of course, there is no more Soviet Union, but we work very closely with Russia, as well as with Japan, with Canada, and with the member nations of the European Space Agency to build and now to maintain our International Space Station. So there's our walking tour this morning. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm going to stick around for a couple minutes. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Please enjoy the rest of your day here at the Kennedy Space Center. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it Jim Lovell that was in that capsule right there?
Yep, that Jim,
2 week.
Frank
Okay.
Borman and Jim Lovell. Yep,
Gotcha.
they were the ones that did the 14 days.
I heard them speak earlier this year, and they said they shared toothbrushes during that trip.
Yeah, and he said at the end of the 14 days, that capsule was smelling pretty ripe.
I can imagine, yeah. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I had no idea what it was. I didn't have actually any other.
Oh, that's the new one.
Look at that, you know.
Look at that. One engine. Which is more powerful than all 5 of those.
I don't know.
Oh, wow. We'll see the Saturn 5
That is
later.
complicated.